Broad daylight. Harlem crowded. The trap is set so everyone can witness Bumpy Johnson get embarrassed. He doesn't raise his voice or step back, just holds their stare, and the whole block feels the mistake. Broad daylight makes men feel brave. It makes them think witnesses are protection. Like a crowded street can prevent consequences. Harlem knew better. The block was alive, vendors calling out, shoes tapping pavement, car horns complaining like always. But there was something underneath it, something quieter than noise, a tension that didn't announce itself. It just settled into shoulders, into eyes, into the way people stopped lingering, because certain men didn't choose noon unless they wanted the whole neighborhood to remember the moment. Bumpy Johnson arrived like he belonged to the daylight. Dark suit, pressed clean, hat sitting right, hands relaxed at his sides, no entourage tightening the air behind him, no loud entrance, just that steady walk, measured, unbothered, like the street owed him room and the street agreed. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't scowling. He was composed. And in Harlem, composure was a kind of language. It told you who feared who. Across the way, the rivals had already arranged themselves like props. One leaned against a parked car, pretending to be casual. His eyes were casual. Another hovered near a doorway, half inside, half out, close enough to disappear, close enough to jump. A third sat on a crate like this was entertainment. And in the center, standing in the open like a man with authority, a messenger. Not important, not powerful, but chosen for a reason. He looked ordinary. He looked like a neighbor, a man who could claim he was just talking if things went wrong. He held a folded paper in one hand, paper cheap, harmless mint to feel official. But the paper wasn't the threat. The threat was what it represented, control. Bumpy stopped a few feet away. The messenger lifted his chin like he was addressing someone beneath him. "Bumpy," he said, loud enough for nearby ears to catch. "Not Mr. Johnson, not sir, just Bumpy." That was the first blade, small, clean, intended to draw blood without anyone noticing. Bumpy didn't react. No tightening in the jaw, no flare in the eyes. He looked at the messenger like he was looking at weather. "Yes," Bumpy said, one word. No emotion, no invitation. The messenger shook the paper once, like a schoolteacher correcting a late student. "You've been expected," he said, "and you're late." That line was meant for the crowd, not for Bumpy. Because everybody on that block knew something, Bumpy Johnson wasn't late for anyone. So if a man said that in public he wasn't trying to communicate, he was trying to embarrass. And embarrassment is a dangerous weapon in Harlem. A man can survive threats. A man can survive violence. But humiliation in front of your own people, that can rot your authority from the inside. Bumpy took a slow half-step closer, not aggressive, just steady. "Late for what?" he asked. The messenger smiled, too pleased with himself. He lifted the paper higher, turning his wrist so the sun caught it, like it was law. "This," he said, "a message came down. You're supposed to answer." Bumpy's eyes touched the paper without taking it, but he wasn't reading words, he was reading the street. He saw the angle of the car, how it blocked the curb. He saw the doorway, how it offered cover. He saw hands, how some were visible and some weren't. He saw faces, how they didn't look curious, they looked prepared. That's the thing about Bumpy. He didn't need a warning. He could taste a setup before it finished forming. The messenger cleared his throat and raised his voice again. "They say you've been taking what isn't yours," he announced. "They say you've been forgetting who you answer to." He said "they" like it was an institution, like it was a judge. But "they" is what cowards use when they don't want their own name attached. Bumpy didn't argue. He didn't deny it. He didn't ask for proof, because this wasn't about proof, this was about posture. The rivals didn't need Bumpy guilty. They needed Bumpy rattled. They needed him to snap, to grab the messenger, to shout. They needed the street to see him lose control just once. Because once a legend looks human, men start trying him. Bumpy let the silence hang for a beat longer than comfortable. Not because he was thinking, because he wanted them to feel what it's like when the room belongs to him. Then he said calmly, "You came all the way out here to say that." The messenger shrugged, acting fearless. "I came to deliver a message," he said, "and you're going to respond, right here, so everyone hears it." There it was, the trap's real shape. They wanted a public exchange, a public crack, a public moment they could replay in rumors. They wanted Bumpy to either beg or explode. Bumpy nodded once. "All right," he said. That single word made a few people stiffen. Because "all right" from Bumpy Johnson didn't sound like surrender. It sounded like acceptance. And acceptance in his voice was a warning, because it meant the decision was already made. Bumpy shifted his stance slightly, changing the angle between himself and the messenger. Subtle, almost polite, but it was the move of a man who understands positioning matters more than emotion. The messenger didn't notice. He was too busy performing. "So go on," he said. "Tell them." Bumpy didn't raise his voice. He didn't step forward. He simply said, "You tell them something first." The messenger blinked. "What?" Bumpy leaned in just enough that the messenger could hear him without the block hearing every syllable. "Tell them you chose daylight," Bumpy said. "Tell them you wanted witnesses." The messenger's smile twitched. Behind him, one of the rivals shifted his weight. Another tightened his jaw. They didn't like that Bumpy was naming the truth out loud. Because once a trap is named, it stops feeling clever. It starts feeling desperate. The messenger tried to keep control. "I don't have to tell them nothing," he snapped. "I'm the one with the message." Bumpy nodded slowly. "That's true," he said. "You're the one holding paper." Then Bumpy lifted his eyes past the messenger toward the men spread across the block. He didn't glare. He didn't challenge. He simply acknowledged them the way a king acknowledges noise. Then he looked back at the messenger and said, "And I'm the one people listen to." No drama, just reality. The crowd didn't cheer. Harlem wasn't that kind of place, but the air shifted anyway. A woman across the street paused with a bag in her hand. A man near the curb lowered his eyes like he didn't want to be seen watching. Because everyone understood what had just happened, Bumpy didn't take the bait. He didn't defend himself. He didn't chase respect. He simply reminded the street who respect naturally gravitates toward. The messenger swallowed, then glanced sideways, quick toward the rivals. That glance was tiny, but it was loud. It told the block the messenger wasn't speaking for himself. He was checking in with his handlers. And once Harlem sees a man checking in, Harlem knows who's truly weak. Bumpy spoke again, calm as ever. "Deliver your message properly," he said. The messenger lifted the paper like a shield. "They say you owe," he barked. "And they say from now on you're done making choices. You follow instructions." That line hit harder than any threat. Done making choices. That was the insult hidden inside the setup, because Bumpy's authority wasn't just money, or territory, or fear. His authority was choice. He chose when violence happened and when it didn't. He chose when peace was possible. He chose the long term over the short term. To say he was done making choices was to say he was finished being the man Harlem trusted. That was the real trap. Not to kill him. To strip him. Bumpy held eye contact for a moment. His face didn't change, but something in his stillness sharpened, like the temperature dropped. "You finished?" Bumpy asked. The messenger hesitated. He wanted to add something extra, something cruel, something that would spark Bumpy. But the street wasn't on his side anymore. "Yeah," he muttered. "I'm finished." Bumpy nodded. "Good." Then he turned his head slightly, speaking just loud enough for the nearby listeners to catch. "You all heard him," he said. "Now you'll hear me." The rivals leaned forward without realizing it. This was the moment they built. Bumpy adjusted his cuff slow, unhurried like he had time. Then he said, "I don't take instructions from men who need puppets to speak." That sentence landed clean. No threats. No profanity. Just a quiet humiliation returned to sender. The messenger's face tightened. Bumpy didn't stop there. And I don't do business in the street like it's a show. He paused. Harlem's not a stage. That was the community layer said without preaching. Because everyone knew what it meant when Harlem became a stage. Police, headlines, mothers crying, kids learning the wrong lessons. Bumpy wasn't going to feed the rivals that. He wasn't going to give them violence on demand. And that refusal, calm, controlled, was its own kind of dominance. It also made the rivals angry, because they weren't just trying to hurt him. They were trying to force him, to control his reaction. And he wouldn't let them touch that. The messenger tried to salvage the moment. "So what?" he snapped. "You just gonna walk away?" Bumpy looked at him like the question was childish. "No," he said. "You are." Then Bumpy did something that made the whole block go quiet. He reached into his pocket. Every rival's body tightened. Every hidden hand got ready. But Bumpy didn't pull steel. He pulled out a single folded bill. Not flashy, not thick, just one. And he placed it gently into the messenger's hand like a tip. "For your trouble," Bumpy said. The messenger froze, confused and insulted at the same time. Bumpy leaned in slightly, voice low enough to feel like a private sentence inside a public scene. "And tell them something else," he said. The messenger's eyes flickered. "What?" Bumpy's voice didn't change. "Tell them daylight doesn't protect anybody." Bumpy stepped back. Then he turned. And he walked. No rush, no glance over his shoulder, no dramatic exit. Just a calm man leaving a trap behind like it was beneath him. And that was the part that scared them. Because the rivals didn't get the scene they wanted. They didn't get panic. They didn't get rage. They didn't get Bumpy losing control. All they got was Bumpy Johnson reminding Harlem without raising his voice who still owned the room. Behind him, the rivals stayed silent. But it wasn't confident silence. It was forced silence. The kind that means a decision is being made. Because after a public failure like that, there's only one direction desperate men go. Escalation. Bumpy kept walking, calm as ever. But his eyes weren't empty. They were already calculating what this daylight choice would cost them. Because when men pull a trap in broad daylight, Bumpy Johnson doesn't answer with noise. He answers with consequence. In Harlem, news didn't travel. It arrived. It slid under doors. It floated through open windows. It rode on the back of a man's breath when he leaned close and said, "You heard what happened?" By the time Bumpy Johnson reached the next corner, the block behind him was already telling the story wrong, not the facts, the feeling. Because in neighborhoods like Harlem, facts are optional. But a feeling becomes law. And the feeling was simple. They tried to embarrass Bumpy in broad daylight, and he didn't move. That calm did more damage than a gun ever could. A man can survive a fight, even a loss, but if you get handled in front of your own people quietly, cleanly, your shadow shrinks. And shadows are everything. Bumpy walked like he always did, measured, unhurried, as if the street was just being itself. But he was listening, not to the words, to the tone of Harlem. He passed a storefront where a man was sweeping the same dust he'd already swept. The broom moved, but the man's eyes stayed on Bumpy, not staring, not gawking, just watching like you watch a clock you trust. Further down, a group of young men went silent mid-laugh, not because they were scared of Bumpy, because they respected the temperature shift that followed him. That's the difference. Fear makes people scatter. Respect makes people hold still. Bumpy nodded once at a kid on the stoop. The kid nodded back, quick and serious, like he'd been handed responsibility just by being seen. Then Bumpy turned into a barbershop, not because he needed a haircut, because barbershops were where a neighborhood's heartbeat sat in a chair and talked. A bell rang as he entered. A few men looked up. No one rushed him. No one announced him. They didn't have to. The barber, an older man with careful hands and a careful mind, didn't ask questions. He simply placed the cloth on the chair and waited, like offering Bumpy a throne without calling it one. Bumpy didn't sit. He stood near the wall, calm, and let the room decide how to behave. That was his gift. He didn't demand order. He made people choose it. A man in the chair tried to keep talking, but his voice got smaller. Another man put down his newspaper, then picked it up again like he forgot why he was holding it. Finally, someone said what everyone was thinking, not loud, almost respectful. "They tried you outside," a man muttered. Bumpy didn't react. He just looked at his own reflection in the mirror, hat still on, face still composed, and said, "They tried." 2 words. No anger, but it answered everything. The younger guy, restless, wanted more. "Bumpy, you gonna let that ride?" The barber's hand froze for a second, just hovering over the man's head, like even the scissors wanted to listen. Bumpy's eyes stayed on the mirror. Then he said something that sounded simple, but carried weight. "I don't let nothing ride," he said. "I just don't run fast." That line settled into the room like smoke. Because everybody knew what it meant, Bumpy didn't forget. He didn't forgive disrespect. He just didn't rush. Rush was for men who didn't have control. Bumpy controlled the calendar. Outside, Harlem kept moving. But now it moved differently. A runner from the rival's side tried to act casual, strolling near the barber shop like he had business there. He didn't come in. He didn't even look through the window. He just lingered long enough to be noticed. Bumpy noticed. He didn't turn his head. He didn't acknowledge it. He simply lifted his eyes slightly, just enough to catch the movement in the mirror. That was all he needed. Then he turned and walked back out. Harlem didn't follow him like fans. Harlem followed him like a body follows its spine. A few steps behind, a man exited the barber shop too, then another. Not together, not obvious, just present, not soldiers, neighbors. That was the community layer nobody could fake, because Bumpy's power wasn't only fear, it was loyalty built over years of quiet decisions. A landlord who'd once tried to squeeze a family learned not to. A shopkeeper who'd been bullied stopped being bullied. A kid who'd been pushed into foolishness got pulled back, not with sermons, but with a job and a warning. People didn't stand with Bumpy because he was loud. They stood with him because he kept the neighborhood from burning. Now the rivals didn't understand that. They thought Harlem was neutral ground. They thought if they embarrassed Bumpy in the street, Harlem would laugh and move on. But Harlem didn't laugh. Harlem measured. And when Harlem measured that moment, it didn't see Bumpy trapped. It saw the rivals exposing themselves, because only desperate men choose broad daylight for a trap. Desperate men need witnesses. Strong men don't. Bumpy walked past a corner where 2 older women sat like judges. They didn't speak, they just watched him pass, and one of them slowly nodded. Not approval like a fan, approval like a community blessing. Bumpy's face stayed calm, but he registered it. He understood something the rivals didn't. If the neighborhood keeps believing in you, you can survive almost anything. But if the neighborhood stops believing in you, you're done, even if you're still breathing. So the rivals' trap hadn't weakened Bumpy. It had tested the neighborhood's faith. And the neighborhood had answered without words. That answer traveled fast. By late afternoon, men who had nothing to do with the rivals were already refusing to do favors for them. Not openly, not dramatically. Quietly. A door that used to open stayed closed. A phone call that used to be returned got ignored. A handshake that used to be offered became a nod from a distance. That's how Harlem punished men. Not with violence first, with isolation. The rivals felt it before anyone told them. They sat in their chosen spots, replaying the noon scene in their minds, expecting laughter, expecting rumors to damage Bumpy. Instead, they heard something else. They heard silence, not peaceful silence, judging silence, the kind of silence that says, "You shouldn't have done that." And that silence did something dangerous to the rivals. It made them angry, because when a trap fails in public, pride demands a correction. And pride is the quickest way to make stupid decisions. Bumpy knew that too. He didn't go home and slam doors. He didn't call every man he knew. He didn't announce retaliation. He went to a quiet place, somewhere Harlem wouldn't notice, where the air smelled like old wood and patience. A back room, not glamorous, just private. One loyal man stood inside with him. Not many, just one, because Bumpy didn't need crowds to feel strong. The man spoke carefully. "They wanted you to snap," he said. "They wanted the street to see it." Bumpy took off his hat, set it down, and smoothed the brim with his thumb like he was straightening a thought. He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "They didn't want me to snap." His voice was calm, almost soft. "They wanted me to beg." That was the moral layer. Because begging is the opposite of respect. Begging makes you smaller in the eyes of men who already want you small. Bumpy's eyes remained steady, and when I didn't, he continued, "They're gonna feel stupid." The loyal man swallowed. "So what happens now?" Bumpy's gaze didn't move, but his presence filled the room like a quiet verdict. "What always happens," he said, "when a man gets embarrassed." He paused. He tries to fix it. That was the legacy layer beginning to form. Because a rival who feels embarrassed doesn't calm down. He escalates. He pushes harder. He tries to rewrite the memory, and that's exactly what Bumpy expected. Bumpy placed his hat back on his head. Perfect. Then he said something that sounded like nothing, but was everything. "Let them make their next choice." The loyal man frowned. "You want to wait?" Bumpy's voice stayed even. "I want them to show Harlem who they really are." Because Bumpy's strength wasn't only in what he did, it was in what he let other men reveal. He understood. If the rivals escalated, Harlem would see it. Harlem would feel it. Harlem would choose again. And every time Harlem chose, Bumpy's foundation got stronger. Bumpy stepped toward the door, not rushed, not tense, controlled. He turned back just once, eyes steady, and said, "And when they fix it." He paused just enough for the sentence to land heavy. "They won't be fixing it on my terms." Then he left the room. Outside, Harlem kept breathing. But now the air had a direction, a sense of inevitability, because everyone could feel it. The trap in daylight was only the opening move. And now the rivals had a choice to make, either swallow the embarrassment or chase pride into something they couldn't undo. Pride is expensive, and in Harlem men go broke trying to afford it. Bumpy Johnson's rivals didn't sleep well after that daylight trap failed. Not because they feared bullets, because they feared laughter, the kind that never happens out loud, the kind that lives in the way people stop answering your calls. They felt it in small humiliations. A bartender who usually poured quick took his time. A corner man who usually nodded looked away. A runner who normally moved eager suddenly got busy. Harlem didn't need to speak. Harlem was already voting, and the rivals hated that more than any threat. So they did what desperate men always do after a public failure. They doubled down. Not quietly. Not smart. They chose something louder, something uglier, something meant to force Bumpy to react, because as long as Bumpy stayed calm, he stayed untouchable. And they couldn't stand that. They started spreading the story themselves, twisting it, sharpening it. They sent mouths into the streets with new versions. Bumpy walked away because he couldn't do nothing. Bumpy got checked and swallowed it. Bumpy's losing Harlem. Not lies to convince outsiders, lies to poison the inside. Because a king doesn't fall from one punch. He falls when people stop believing the crown is real. Bumpy heard the whispers. He didn't chase them. He didn't correct them. That was a mistake men always made when they faced him. They thought silence meant he didn't notice. Bumpy noticed everything. He just didn't waste motion. That evening, he stepped into a place where rumors turned into decisions. A small social spot, not glamorous, not loud. A room where men talked low and paid attention. The kind of place where respect was currency and disrespect was a declaration of war. Bumpy entered without announcing himself. And still, the room adjusted. Chairs shifted. Conversation softened. Eyes moved carefully. Not fear. Respect. That's what the rivals wanted to break. They wanted this room to stay the same when Bumpy walked in like he was just another man. Tonight, they arranged for it not to. A rival affiliate was already there, sitting too comfortably, laughing too loudly, holding court like the seat belonged to him. And right when Bumpy took his place near the wall, quiet, controlled, this man stood up with a drink in his hand and spoke across the room. Not to Bumpy directly, to everyone. "So this where we stand now?" he said, smiling. "We just let anybody do whatever, as long as they wear a nice suit?" A few men stiffened. That wasn't random talk. That was a knife thrown for the crowd to watch it stick. Bumpy didn't look up immediately. He let the words hang in the air like smoke, letting everyone taste who released it. Then slowly, Bumpy lifted his eyes. The man kept smiling. He wanted Bumpy to engage. He wanted heat. He wanted an argument. He wanted an argument. He wanted Bumpy dragged down into public emotion, because emotion makes a man visible, and a visible man can be targeted. Bumpy stayed still. His voice came out calm, quiet enough that men leaned in to catch it. "You talking to me?" he asked. The room tightened. The rival affiliate raised his drink like a toast. "Who else?" he said. "You, the one everybody been whispering about." He turned slightly, letting his words sweep the room. "Broad daylight, they set a trap and look at you." He laughed once. Too loud. You walked away. Now it was direct. Now it was personal. Now it was a challenge in front of witnesses. That moment was designed to do one thing: force Bumpy to prove himself right there, to either punch the man, threaten him, or erupt. Any reaction could be sold as weakness. If Bumpy hit him reckless, if Bumpy threatened him desperate, if Bumpy did nothing soft, that's the trap inside the disrespect. No matter what you do, you lose. Unless you control the frame. Bumpy's face didn't change. He didn't stand up fast. He didn't storm forward. He didn't raise his voice. He simply held the man's gaze like the man was a stain on a clean wall. Then Bumpy said, "You got a lot of confidence for somebody borrowing a room." The words were gentle, but they cut deep. Borrowing a room. Meaning, you don't own this. You're only allowed because nobody's removed you yet. A few men in the corners lowered their eyes. The rival affiliate's smile twitched. He tried again, louder. "Borrowing?" He laughed. "Man, you ain't even in charge no more. Everybody knows it." Bumpy nodded once slowly. "Everybody?" he said. Then Bumpy's eyes moved not around the room wildly, just calmly, like a spotlight without heat. He looked at a man near the bar, then another by the doorway, then the one sitting closest to the rival affiliate. Nobody spoke. Nobody agreed. The rival affiliate's laugh got smaller. Because Bumpy wasn't arguing with him. Bumpy was showing him something. In a room like this, silence is an answer. And the room was answering. The affiliate's pride flared. He took a step forward, drink still in hand. "Say something," he demanded. "Tell him you still run Harlem. Tell him right now." There it was again. The demand for performance. The demand for a public speech. Because they wanted Bumpy to play their game. Bumpy didn't. He took a slow sip from his own glass, calm, unhurried, and set it down. Then he said something soft enough it didn't sound like a threat, but strong enough it felt like one. "I don't have to tell Harlem nothing," Bumpy said. "Harlem tells itself." That line changed the room. Because it was true. Bumpy's power wasn't a microphone. It was a relationship. The rival affiliate swallowed, then tried to push further, because that's what his handlers expected. He had to deliver a bigger insult, something that couldn't be ignored. So he did. He smiled again, uglier this time. "You know what they say," he said. "They say you got old." A few men shifted uncomfortably. Old. That word wasn't about age. It was about relevance. It was about legacy. It was about saying the era of Bumpy Johnson was over. And that insult was aimed at the deepest layer of all, not money, not territory. Time. Bumpy stared at him for a long moment. No anger, just an assessment. Then Bumpy said, "Old?" He repeated, like he was tasting the word. He nodded slightly. "Maybe." The rival affiliate's eyes brightened, like he thought he'd won, like he'd finally cracked him. Bumpy continued calmly, "But old is why I'm still here." That's when the affiliate's smile died. Because Bumpy wasn't defending himself, he was redefining the insult into a badge. Old meant experience, patience, survival. Old meant everyone else already tried and failed. Bumpy leaned forward slightly, voice still low, spoken aloud, friendly. "You know what young men do?" Bumpy asked. The affiliate didn't answer. Bumpy answered anyway. "They mistake noise for power." He paused. "And speed for control." Then Bumpy sat back again, calm. That was the moral layer, restraint over ego. The affiliate, humiliated now, tried the last to move something bold, something reckless. He lifted his glass and let a little of the drink spill onto the floor near Bumpy's shoes. Not a lot, just enough to be seen. The room went dead quiet. That wasn't an accident. That was a public disrespect so clean it almost looked harmless. But everybody knew what it meant. It meant, "I can reach you." It meant, "I'm not afraid of you." It meant, "Your rules don't apply to me." This was the moment where violence felt possible. Every man in the room could feel it in their chest. Because now, if Bumpy did nothing, it would look like permission. And if he reacted violently, it would look like the rivals controlled him. The trap tightened again. And Bumpy did the last thing the rivals expected. He didn't stand up. He didn't wipe his shoe. He didn't even look down at the spill. He looked straight at the affiliate and said, calmly, "You finished?" The affiliate hesitated because Bumpy wasn't acting like a man insulted. Bumpy was acting like a man waiting for paperwork to be complete. "Yeah," the affiliate said, trying to sound tough. "I'm finished." Bumpy nodded once, like a judge accepting the final statement. Then Bumpy said, "Good." He lifted a finger, not pointing like a threat, more like a reminder. "Now listen close," Bumpy said softly. "You did that in front of people." The affiliate's brow furrowed. Bumpy's voice stayed even. "So when it comes back to you, don't call it unfair." That was all. No promise of violence. No detailed threat, just the calm announcement of consequence. And consequence is what made Bumpy dangerous. The affiliate tried to laugh it off, but the laugh didn't land. The room didn't join him. Because the room understood something, the rivals had just pushed this too far. Not because Bumpy couldn't handle disrespect, because the community couldn't tolerate men turning their space into a circus. A man in the corner stood up quietly and left. Then another. Not because they were scared, because they didn't want to be part of the rival's moment. That's how you know who controls a room. People start refusing to participate in the other man's reality. The rival affiliate looked around, realizing his audience was evaporating. He had come to perform, but now he was performing alone. And Bumpy, still seated, still calm, watched it happen like he'd already predicted it. The affiliate backed away, drink still in hand, trying to save face. "Whatever," he muttered. "Ain't nothing gonna happen." Bumpy didn't respond. He didn't need to, because the room had already answered. And outside, Harlem was answering too. The rivals thought public disrespect would pressure Bumpy into breaking, but it did the opposite. It reminded Harlem why Bumpy mattered. He wasn't just a man with power. He was a man with control. He didn't let pride steer him. He let principle steer him. And when principle is steady, people stand behind it. The rivals, meanwhile, had made their next choice. They chose escalation through humiliation. They chose to make it public. They chose to challenge Bumpy's legacy in front of the neighborhood. And in Harlem, when you challenge a man's legacy publicly, You're not just asking for a response, you're asking for an ending. The next morning, Harlem looked normal. That's the trick about neighborhoods with history. They learn how to hide tension behind routine. The coffee still poured. The buses still groaned at the curb. Kids still ran to school like the world wasn't dangerous. But the adults moved like they were listening for something. Because after that public disrespect, the street understood a truth it didn't like admitting. This wasn't just rivalry anymore. This was testing the rules. And rules, real rules, are the only thing keeping a community from collapsing into chaos. Bumpy Johnson didn't wake up angry. Anger is a poor man's fuel. It burns fast and leaves you empty. Bumpy woke up quiet. The kind of quiet that means decisions are already arranged in his mind like pieces on a board. He didn't rush out to make an example. He didn't send a parade of men into the streets. He did what he always did when the neighborhood started shaking. He checked on the people who would feel it first. The ones who didn't have guns. The ones who didn't have protection. The ones who couldn't afford a war, because the community layer wasn't an accessory to Bumpy. It was the foundation. He walked into a small store owned by an older man who'd been in Harlem longer than most of the roomers. The shelves were neat. The register was old. The air smelled like paper bags and tobacco. The owner looked up and immediately exhaled relief, not fear. "Morning, Bumpy," he said, soft. Bumpy nodded. "Morning," Bumpy replied. He didn't ask for anything yet. He just stood there, looking around like he was making sure the walls were still standing. The owner hesitated, then spoke carefully. "They've been coming by," he admitted. "Those boys." Bumpy's eyes stayed calm. "Coming by how?" he asked. The owner swallowed. "Talking, asking questions, saying things." Bumpy didn't flinch. "What things?" he asked, voice even. The owner lowered his voice instinctively, as if the walls could repeat it. "They telling folks you don't run nothing no more. They telling folks to stop paying you respect." That wasn't business talk. That was sabotage. And sabotage is always aimed at the community first, because the community is where legitimacy lives. Bumpy's gaze dropped to the counter, then back up. "Did they threaten you?" he asked. The owner looked embarrassed, like admitting it would make him small. "Not exactly," he said. Not with words." Bumpy's face stayed still. "Show me," he said. The owner hesitated, then lifted his sleeve. A bruise, yellowing, old enough to show it happened yesterday, fresh enough to still sting. "They bumped into me," the owner whispered, "like it was an accident." Bumpy nodded slowly. "Accidents don't leave messages," he said. And there it was, the line. Not a dramatic declaration, just a calm principle, because Bumpy could tolerate disrespect aimed at him. But when rivals started touching the neighborhood, touching the elderly, the shopkeepers, the innocent, that wasn't rivalry. That was contamination. Bumpy reached into his pocket and placed money on the counter. The owner waved it off. "Bumpy, no." Bumpy's hand didn't move. "Keep it," Bumpy said, "for anything they break." The owner's eyes softened. "You don't have to do that." Bumpy looked him in the eye. "I do," he said, "because this is your home." Then Bumpy left the store with the same measured walk. No speed, no anger. But Harlem could feel something had shifted, because when a man like Bumpy starts checking on the community, it means he's drawing a boundary. And boundaries are dangerous when desperate men don't respect them. Later that day, the rivals tested the boundary again. Not with guns, with theater. They chose a place where the community couldn't avoid them. A public space, a place where everyone had to pass eventually. And they staged it like a message. A younger boy, barely grown, was stopped in front of witnesses. Not attacked, not robbed, just held in place like a demonstration. A rival man stood close to him, smiling too casually, speaking loud enough for others to hear. "You tell Bumpy," the man said, "this how it's gonna be now." The boy's eyes darted, terrified. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even in the game. He was just a neighborhood kid used as a billboard. And that's what made it worse, because the rivals weren't trying to fight Bumpy. They were trying to force Harlem to choose against him through fear. Bumpy arrived quietly, not from far away, not with drama. He simply appeared at the edge of the crowd, and the crowd parted like they'd been waiting to. The rival man saw him and smiled wider, like he was proud to be standing on the line. "Look who came," the rival said. "You here to talk now?" Bumpy looked at the kid first, not at the rival. That mattered, because it signaled the moral layer. Bumpy's first concern wasn't pride, it was protection. Bumpy spoke calmly to the kid, like the rival wasn't even there. "Go on," Bumpy said. The kid didn't move. He looked frozen. Bumpy's voice stayed steady. "Go home," he repeated. The kid took one uncertain step, then another, then slipped through the crowd like water escaping a crack. Now Bumpy turned his attention to the rival man. The rival man chuckled like he'd just watched a trick. "You see," he said to the crowd, "that's Bumpy now. He don't do nothing. He just tells kids to run." He wanted laughter. He wanted the crowd to take the bait. But the crowd didn't laugh, because Bumpy hadn't done nothing. He'd done something important. He removed the innocent from the equation. And once the innocent were safe, now the equation could become clean. Bumpy stepped closer, slow. The rival man held his ground, smiling, trying to look fearless. "You got something to say?" the rival asked. Bumpy's eyes were level. "Yes," he said. One word. Then Bumpy let silence sit on the street for a beat. Long enough for the rival's smile to wobble. Then Bumpy said, soft but clear, "You put your hands on my neighborhood." The rival shrugged like it was nothing. "This, your neighborhood," he scoffed, "thought it belonged to whoever could take it." That line, "take it," was the philosophy of men who leave neighborhoods in ashes. Bumpy's face stayed calm. "Taking is easy," Bumpy said. "Keeping is what makes a man." That sentence hit harder than a threat, because it wasn't about violence, it was about legacy. The rival man tried to laugh again, but it didn't come out right. He leaned forward, still trying to poke the bear. "So what you gonna do?" he asked. "You gonna hit me? In front of everybody? Or you gonna walk away again?" There it was. The trap question. Either reaction could be spun. Bumpy didn't bite. He didn't swing. He didn't retreat. He simply stepped in close enough that only the rival man could hear the next sentence clearly. And Bumpy said, in a voice like a locked door, "You crossed a line you don't get to cross twice." The rival's smile twitched. He tried to hide it by smirking bigger. "You threatening me?" he whispered. Bumpy shook his head once, slow. "No," he said. "I'm informing you. That's the difference. Threats are emotional. Information is inevitable." Bumpy stepped back and looked at the crowd, not at all of them, just enough to be felt. His voice stayed calm. "This street belongs to the people who live on it," Bumpy said, "not to the men who use it like a stage." Then he turned slightly toward the rival man again. "You want to play in daylight," Bumpy said, "so you can feel safe." He paused. "Daylight don't make you safe, it just makes you visible." That sentence didn't sound violent, but everyone heard what it meant. Visibility is a liability when a man decides you've gone too far. The rival man's jaw tightened. He wanted to respond. He wanted to escalate again. But something stopped him. Not fear of Bumpy's fists, fear of what Bumpy's calm implied, that the decision had already been placed somewhere deeper than emotion. The rival man forced a laugh, backing away like he didn't care. "Ain't no line," he muttered. "Not for you." Bumpy didn't chase him. He didn't argue. He watched him leave. And that was the quietest, coldest kind of dominance, letting a man walk away with his pride intact so the lesson could land harder later. The crowd slowly dispersed. People went back to their errands. But the street didn't forget, because now the rivals had done the unforgivable thing. They'd used the community as leverage. They'd touched the wrong people. They dragged innocent faces into a power struggle, and Bumpy Johnson, who could tolerate disrespect aimed at him, had made it clear that kind of disrespect had a different price, not paid in words, paid in consequence. Bumpy walked away with the same measured pace, but Harlem could feel it. The air wasn't tense anymore. It was set. Like the next moment wasn't a possibility, it was scheduled. By the time the rivals realized what they'd done, it was already too late. That's the thing about Bumpy Johnson. He didn't punish fast. He punished correctly. And there's a difference. Fast punishment is emotion. Correct punishment is strategy. The rivals spent the next day moving louder, acting bolder, telling themselves the neighborhood was starting to bend. They took up space. They laughed in the open. They sent runners to corners they'd never dared step on before, just to test the temperature. And every time they did, they saw something that confused them. No one stopped them. No one challenged them. No one challenged them. No one shouted. Harlem just watched, quietly. That quiet made them cocky. They didn't understand that a calm street isn't always a safe street. Sometimes it's calm because the decision has already been made. Bumpy didn't call a meeting with 10 men. He called one man, not because he lacked muscle, because he understood something deeper. The more people involved, the more noise. The more noise, the more mistakes. Bumpy preferred clean work. He met his loyal man in a place nobody would romanticize. A back room with plain walls, a table with scratches, a chair that didn't match the other chair. No ceremony, just focus. The loyal man spoke first, careful. They're pushing harder, he said. They're trying to make you react. Bumpy lit a cigarette slow, like the flame had to earn his attention. They're not trying to make me react, Bumpy said. He exhaled gently. They're trying to make Harlem doubt. That was the power layer, because rivals don't defeat a man like Bumpy by attacking him directly. They defeat him by poisoning the faith around him. Bumpy's loyal man nodded. So what's the move? Bumpy didn't answer right away. He sat there for a moment, looking down at the table like he could see the whole neighborhood mapped into the scratches. Then he said, "We're gonna let them feel safe." The loyal man blinked. Safe? Bumpy nodded. Safe enough to step deeper, he said. Safe enough to sign their name to it. That was Bumpy's style. He didn't swing at shadows. He waited for men to show their face. Because once a man shows his face publicly, erasing him becomes simple. The loyal man swallowed. They're planning something, Bumpy. I heard. Bumpy raised a finger slightly, not to silence him harshly, to slow him down. Hearing is noise, Bumpy said. Knowing is control. Then Bumpy leaned forward. His voice stayed calm, but the air sharpened. Tell me what you know. The loyal man took a breath. They're setting up another daylight play, he said. A bigger one. They want to take something that belongs to you in public and make you swallow it. Bumpy's eyes didn't widen. They cooled. Where? He asked. The loyal man gave a location. Bumpy nodded once. No surprise, no panic, just acceptance. Then he said, "Good." That word startled the loyal man. "Good?" he repeated. Bumpy took a slow drag, then spoke with the quiet certainty of a man choosing the weather. "They want daylight," Bumpy said. "Let them have it." He tapped ash into an empty tray like punctuation. But this time, the daylight belongs to me. The rivals chose a busy spot. They wanted a crowd. They wanted witnesses. They wanted the story to explode out of Harlem and travel wherever power traveled. They arrived with posture and confidence, like men walking into a room they already owned. One of them, high-mouthed, proud grin, stood at the center, speaking loud, guiding the moment like a director. A few of their men spread out in positions that looked casual to outsiders. But Harlem wasn't outsiders. Harlem could read body language like scripture. The crowd began to gather, not because they loved drama, because they understood drama was being forced on them. And then the rivals made their move. Something symbolic, not just money, not just territory. Something meant to represent Bumpy's authority. They reached for it in the open. like they were taking a crown off a king's head in front of the kingdom. It should have sparked chaos. It should have sparked shouting. That's what they expected. Instead, Bumpy arrived quietly. No announcement. He didn't burst through the crowd. The crowd simply shifted like water, making room for a stone. Bumpy stepped into the edge of the scene and stopped, still, silent, watching. His face didn't show anger. It didn't show fear. It showed patience. The rivals noticed him and smiled like they'd finally gotten what they wanted. One of them called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Bumpy, look at this." He held up what he'd taken, like a trophy. "You want to tell Harlem why you letting this happen?" The crowd held its breath. This was the moment. The rivals wanted Bumpy to act like a trapped man. But Bumpy didn't move like a trapped man. He moved like a man who already saw the ending. He looked at the rival holding the trophy. Then he looked at the crowd. Then back to the rival. And Bumpy asked a simple question, calm as a priest. "You done?" The rival laughed. "Done," he said. "I'm just getting started." Bumpy nodded. "All right," he said. And that was the signal. Not a shout, not a gesture. Just a calm word spoken with certainty. Somewhere behind the rivals, a man in the crowd took one step back, then another, then another. The rivals didn't notice at first, because they were too busy staring at Bumpy, waiting for the explosion. But the crowd began to change shape. People weren't running. They weren't screaming. They were simply repositioning, like they didn't want to be too close when something finally fell. That's when the rivals started to feel it. Not fear yet, unease, because the crowd was no longer their audience. The crowd was becoming Bumpy's. The rival holding the trophy tried to salvage control. "You ain't gonna do nothing," he taunted. "You gonna stand there like you always do?" Bumpy took one slow step forward. His voice stayed low. "This right here," Bumpy said, "is why you losing." The rival sneered. "Losing? I got your—" Bumpy cut him off without raising volume. "You got something in your hand," Bumpy said. "That's all." Then Bumpy's eyes slid to the rival's friends spread out, pretending to be relaxed. "None of you look relaxed," Bumpy said calmly. That line was soft, but it exposed everything. Because it was true. Every rival man had tension in his shoulders, tension in his hands, tension in his eyes. They were acting brave, but they weren't comfortable. Comfort is what a man has when he's truly in control. Bumpy continued, voice steady. "You chose daylight because you thought it would keep you safe," he said. He paused, letting the crowd hear it. "But daylight don't protect you," he said. "It just makes sure everybody sees what happens to you." The rival's grin faltered for the first time. He tried to laugh again, tried to make it a joke. "Man, you talking like you a preacher?" he said. Bumpy nodded. "And you moving like you already need forgiveness," Bumpy replied. The crowd made a sound, not a cheer, more like a low exhale. Because that was Bumpy's dominance. He didn't out-yell men. He out-framed them. He turned their moment into a mirror. And in that mirror, they looked smaller. The rival's pride snapped. He stepped forward aggressively, closing the gap. "You ain't doing nothing," he hissed. "You don't got the heart no more." Bumpy's face didn't change, but his eyes locked. "Heart?" Bumpy repeated softly. He looked at the crowd again, then back at the rival. "My heart is why Harlem's still standing," he said. That was the moral layer, because Bumpy wasn't violent for pleasure. He wasn't chaos. He was order, built inside a criminal world. The rival opened his mouth to respond, and then it happened. Not a gunshot, not a scream, something quieter. A car door down the street closed. A second door closed. A third. Sharp, synchronized. Like punctuation. The rival's eyes flicked away just for a second, and that second was where Bumpy lived. Because Bumpy didn't need violence, he needed timing. The rival's men spread out suddenly realized they weren't spread out anymore. They were separated. The crowd, without panic, had created distance. And in that distance, Bumpy's people appeared. Not in a dramatic line, not waving weapons, just men standing in places where they hadn't been before, quiet, present, unavoidable. The rivals tried to adjust, but adjustment takes time. And Bumpy had stolen time from them. The rival holding the trophy swallowed. His voice came out smaller. "You set this up," he muttered. Bumpy nodded once. "I let you set it up," Bumpy corrected. That's the difference. Bumpy didn't spring a trap. He let them build one, and then he used their confidence as the rope. The rival's jaw tightened. "You think you got us cornered?" he asked. Bumpy's voice stayed calm. "I don't think," Bumpy said. "I know what you are." He stepped closer now, slow, controlled. "You're men who needed a crowd to feel brave," Bumpy said. He paused. "And now the crowd ain't yours." The rival glanced around and finally understood. No one in the crowd was smiling with them. The crowd's loyalty was silent but clear, because the rivals had crossed the line. They'd used Harlem like a stage. They'd threatened kids, bruised shopkeepers, pushed fear into places that needed peace. Harlem wasn't going to clap for that, and Bumpy, standing calm in the center of it, looked less like a criminal and more like a guardian of the neighborhood's dignity. That's why the rivals were losing. Not because Bumpy had more men, because Bumpy had more meaning. The rival swallowed again. "So what now?" he forced out. Bumpy looked at the object in his hand. Then Bumpy held out his palm, not demanding, just waiting. The rival hesitated. Pride fighting survival. Bumpy didn't rush him. He let the hesitation become humiliation. Finally, the rival placed the object into Bumpy's hand. The crowd didn't cheer, but the air released. Because that exchange, simple, quiet, was the real climax. Not a punch, not a body. A surrender in broad daylight. Bumpy turned the object over once in his hand like it was nothing. Then he handed it to someone beside him, calmly, like returning something that never stopped belonging to him. Then Bumpy leaned toward the rival, close enough for the rival to feel the weight of his voice. "You wanted an ending," Bumpy said softly. The rival's eyes widened. Bumpy continued, "Be careful what you ask for." Then Bumpy stepped back and looked at the crowd again. His voice carried just enough. "This neighborhood don't belong to the loudest men," Bumpy said. "It belongs to the ones who keep it standing." Then he turned to leave. No celebration, no speech, no parade. Just calm dominance walking away while the other side stood in the daylight, exposed. The rivals didn't chase him. They couldn't, because chasing would mean admitting they'd lost. And the crowd already knew. They'd pulled the trap in broad daylight, and Bumpy Johnson had ended it without spilling a drop. Not because he was weak, because he was in control. And control is what kills rivals long after the moment is over, after the daylight ended. Harlem didn't celebrate. Harlem isn't built like that. Harlem survived too much to clap for violence, even when violence feels justified, even when pride begs for a parade. Instead, Harlem did what it always did after a public power shift. It went quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't mean peace. The kind that means the lesson is sinking into the concrete. That night, the streetlights came on like they always did. Windows glowed. Radios played low. Dishes clinked behind curtains. But in every place where men talked business, barbershops, back rooms, doorways, corners, there was one topic moving without being announced. They tried Bumpy in daylight, and daylight didn't save them. The rivals thought the worst part was losing their moment. They were wrong. The worst part was what came next. Not bullets, not bodies, not a public retaliation that would make headlines. Bumpy didn't need headlines. He needed memory, because memory is where legacy lives. And Bumpy Johnson knew something the rivals never learned. If the street remembers you as controlled, you live longer than your enemies. If the street remembers you as reckless, you die even while you're alive. So Bumpy didn't respond with chaos. He responded with structure. The next morning, the rivals woke up and started noticing what Harlem had already decided. A man who used to open a door for them didn't open it. A supplier who used to answer delayed. A runner who used to move eager moved nervous. A phone that used to ring back stayed silent. Not open rebellion, something worse. A slow, collective refusal. Harlem wasn't screaming, "We're with Bumpy." Harlem was simply behaving like the rivals were temporary, and nothing scares ambitious men like being treated as temporary. One rival tried to laugh it off. "It's just a bad day," he told his men. "We'll tighten it back up." But tightening takes leverage, and leverage takes belief. They'd lost belief the moment Bumpy stayed calm in daylight, because now the story wasn't Bumpy got trapped. The story was Bumpy didn't even break a sweat. And once that story settles, everything else becomes heavy for the other side. Bumpy moved through the day like the neighborhood hadn't changed. That was part of the lesson too. He didn't throw it in their faces. He didn't walk around demanding extra respect. He didn't make the block feel like it had to perform loyalty. He simply remained himself. Calm, quiet, certain. Because true control doesn't need announcements. It just needs consistency. He visited one of the older men on the block, someone who'd seen Harlem before. It learned how to hide pain. The man offered him coffee. Bumpy accepted. They sat in a small room with the radio low and the curtains half drawn. The older man spoke softly. "They got embarrassed," the man said. "Embarrassed men get stupid." Bumpy nodded like he already knew. "They already got stupid," Bumpy replied. The older man studied him. "You worried about retaliation?" he asked. Bumpy's face stayed calm. "No," he said. Then, after a beat, "I'm worried about the street." That was the community layer spoken plain, because Bumpy knew retaliation wasn't only a threat to him, it was a threat to Harlem's stability. To mothers who just wanted kids home safe. To shopkeepers who just wanted to close their register without fear. To old men who just wanted to sit and breathe without being pulled into somebody else's pride. Bumpy didn't build his name by burning the neighborhood. He built it by keeping it standing, even when standing required hard choices. The older man nodded slowly, respect deepening. "That's why people follow you," he said. Bumpy didn't smile. He just said, "That's why I can't be careless." The rivals tried to respond anyway. They tried to reclaim their image. They sent men out to post up in places they didn't belong, just to be seen. They made loud jokes. They tried to act like the daylight surrender meant nothing. But Harlem treated them like boys playing dress-up. Because when a man loses publicly, he loses privately too, and private is where the real business lives. Then came the final twist of the knife, quiet, inevitable. A rival tried to arrange a sit-down, a meeting, a conversation, not with Bumpy directly, with someone who mattered, someone connected. The rival thought if he could be seen negotiating, it would restore his credibility. But Bumpy understood something else. A sit-down only has power if the room respects both sides, and Harlem no longer respected them. So Bumpy didn't refuse with a threat. He refused with absence. The meeting was set, the time was agreed, the place was chosen, and when the rival arrived, dressed sharp, acting confident, he found the room empty. Not because Bumpy was scared, because Bumpy was done acknowledging him, and there is no humiliation deeper than realizing you're no longer considered worth the effort. Word of that empty room spread faster than any gunshot, because it wasn't violence, it was erasure. It told every ambitious man watching, Bumpy Johnson doesn't just defeat rivals, he removes them from the conversation. The rivals tried again. They pushed rumors harder. They pressured more. They tried to buy loyalty. But loyalty bought with fear is thin. It tears easily. And Harlem's loyalty to Bumpy wasn't purchased in one night. It was built over time through restraint, through principle, through protection. So the rival's loyalty leaked away, slowly, quietly. Then all at once, a runner stopped running. A lookout stopped looking. A friend stopped answering. And the rivals, for the first time, felt what it's like to be surrounded by people and still be alone. That loneliness is what ended them. Not a shootout, not a dramatic funeral, not a headline, just a neighborhood deciding you no longer matter. Bumpy knew it was happening. He didn't gloat. He didn't take victory laps. He did something more powerful. He returned the neighborhood to routine. He made sure the shopkeeper could work without bruises. He made sure kids could pass corners without being used as messages. He made sure the block could breathe again. Because in Bumpy's world, that was the real win. Not dominance for ego. Dominance for stability. The final image wasn't blood. It was quieter than that. Bumpy, walking the same streets under the same streetlights, still calm, still controlled, while the men who tried to trap him in daylight became ghosts in their own city. And Harlem remembered, not that Bumpy was violent. That Bumpy was inevitable, that if you tried to shame him publicly, he wouldn't explode. He'd let the neighborhood watch you destroy yourself, because that was his legacy: power through restraint, control through silence, respect as law. And the rivals who pulled the trap in broad daylight learned too late that daylight doesn't protect you from a man whose power lives in the long game.